Good ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A. This is where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on a revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers. When she isn't touring the planet lecturing on American torture mass media imagery, she's lecturing at the Film, Television and Media Studies Department at Auckland University. She is the digital feminism, what John Key is the smiling and waving. Blogger, Phoebe Fletcher. And he makes Dick Cheney look ethical. Tax redistribution is like kryptonite to him. He defines diversity as having a semi-automatic weapon and a fully automatic weapon. Right-wing storm blogger, Cameron Slater. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1. Phil Goff gave his State of the Nation address in New Lynn, while John Key gave his in Henderson. Goff says the first $5,000 will be tax-free, while John Key wants to privatise assets and implement austerity measures. No one can pretend that National and Labour are fighting over the centre ground anymore. Who won? Issue 2. Did Rodney Hyde's concession to appoint 38 unelected Māori to Auckland Council committees just cost ACT the Epsom seat? Issue 3 tonight. Len Brown wants Auckland to be a green city with a target to reduce CO2 emissions by 40%. Great idea or wanky nonsense? And we'll end the show on a final word. But let's kick things off with issue 1. Phil Goff in New Lynn aimed his debate at Kiwis trying to balance the weekly budget around the kitchen table, while John Key in Henderson wanted to get New Zealanders talking ideas around the water cooler. Where will the debate be won? Around the water cooler or the kitchen table? Phoebe, Phil Goff noted that 700 millionaires in New Zealand have received $1,000 each week since the tax cuts, and points out that that $120 million per week of that money we're borrowing is actually for these tax cuts. By aiming at those trying to balance the budget at the kitchen table each week, has he done enough to appeal to Labour's core constituency?
I think he has. I think it was a great speech, really, in terms of the way that he politically positioned himself. He has pointed out some of the fallacy, I think, in National's policy, and that we are borrowing huge amounts of money per week.
But Labour would borrow more.
Labour were borrowing more, but the wealth is not being distributed around New Zealand equally, and I think that causes... It never has, but the gap is getting wider in terms of poor and rich at the moment. So we're getting this discussion over the spirit level in society, and whether that has ongoing effects, that we have, you know, a group of people that are getting poorer and poorer, which is going to...
Even after 9 years of Labour, they still got poorer.
After 9 years of Labour, they still got poorer, but we don't have policy coming out of National that is going to address that. I think Phil Goff has, you know, in terms of the way that he's politically targeted himself at Labour, he's shown that Labour has got teeth now.
Well, that $5,000 though.
Well, hold on. The criticism towards the first $5,000 being tax-free was immediate, with claims that he hasn't shown where he will find the $1.3 billion to fund it. Magical pixie fairylands were invoked to write off Labour's move to the left. How did you read it?
Well, where is he going to get the $1.3 billion? You've identified only $120 million a week of that. It's not going to get anywhere near
$260 million he can close down.
Cameron, didn't he say, John Key say as well, that they've increased their budget by $1.1 billion?
That's what he said is natural growth within government spending. So they're not actually going to be cutting government spending. What they're cutting is the growth in government spending. Now you just said the poor are getting poorer. But government spending increased 50% over 6 years under Labour, and the poor got poorer.
Hold on a second. That's because National previously had cut the bloody thing right back to the bone, increasing those.
But they're saying the gap's increasing. The gap's increasing despite government expenditure of increasing. We can't afford. You talk about, oh, we're borrowing this, but Labour will borrow more. We can't keep borrowing to fund a lifestyle of a first world country when we have a second world income.
However, of course, Keynesian managed capitalism would critique that and say, no, hold on, Labour did the right thing.
I discussed this with you last week.
Labour did the right thing during the good times, paid down the government debt, and now you've got to increase
Go and explain to your bank manager that you want to run your mortgage under Keynesian policies and it won't work. He'll send you out the door with a swift kick in the ass.
That's because housing and running a country are two different things.
But they're not.
National Party strategists believe that the 60% popularity in the opinion poll is real, meaning John Key can promote the privatisation of major state assets and debt cuts into public spending. Have they made as much of a mistake over this issue as they did over mine and conservation land?
I think possibly. I mean, what we're seeing with the releases with John Key is that you've actually got 80% of people that don't support the sale of public assets. So I think,
that's a facetious number, pulled out of nowhere. What a stuff poll.
But that's where they're getting their opinion polls.
80% of people said Phil Goff's hair colour's a stupid colour too.
Cam, even Bernard Hickey thinks it's a bad idea to sell off assets and forego dividends in perpetuity. In a small market like the New Zealand electricity market,
but that's not,
won't private oligopolies end up manipulating the prices, meaning we'll actually be worse off?
No. See, you say Bernard Hickey's against us selling off assets and foregoing there is no foregoing of dividends. I've explained this to a few people. Look, you've got owners of companies now who own companies. They already own the assets that they've got, which is the argument that you use, that what we don't want to have is Kiwis investing money into something they already own. Well, shareholders of existing companies, forget that they're state-owned or whatever, let's just use Google as an example. If they want to raise $1 billion because they want to develop some new software, what do? They issue new shares, they go to the market and they...
I don't own Google.
Whatever.
I own...
If you're not grasping this simple concept, you're not grasping what it is that
you're the one who's grasping, trying to sell this idea of selling off our assets.
It's not selling them off. What it's doing is it's allowing the government or allowing these state-owned companies to extend their capital base to invest. I'll give you an example, Meridian Energy. Let's say it thinks that it needs to get $1 billion to invest in wind farms through the Wairarapa, for example. It can only at the moment do one thing: go cap in hand to the government and ask them for $1 billion. Or it can go to the market. It can go to the market, expand its capital base, have people like you, nice green sort of pinkos who think that wind farms are great. You can say that's a damn good idea. I'm going to invest a spare 5,000 that I've got into that company, and not only will you get money in your pocket, but the company.
But we can already do that through bonds.
Borrowing.
No. You could.
Borrowing. Bonds is a fancy word for borrowing.
Those bonds can already be done for state-owned enterprises. You don't need to put it on the stock. You don't need to put it on the stock market. To both of you, can Goff claim to be a credible government in waiting if he hasn't stipulated exactly where the cash will come from for the first tax-free $5,000?
I think we need to wait for the numbers. I think what's interesting to me is that the figures from the right are ranging from 52 to 60 cents on, the top tax bracket. We've had Goff say it's actually going to apply to really high income earners. So it's not around the $100,000 mark. I think there was some sort of criticism over that and the idea that that actually might isolate part of Labour's constituency. But, there's an argument that this might be actually on a par with Australia. If you look at Australia, it's 45 cents in the dollar that you get taxed for over 180,000. So I would like to see more on the numbers. And I think those are the questions that everyone has, but I think he's come out with a strong
You can't use highlight rates because unless you've actually worked in Australia and understand the tax system, which I have, your 45-cent highlight rate, no one pays that rate because there's so many things that you can preload. You can preload your company car and that comes off as a tax-free threshold. So the effective taxation rate is not 45 cents. And anyone who uses those headline rates to say, well, we can do that here in New Zealand, is just simply lying to the electorate.
So question to both of you. Isn't the role of the state to prevent private monopolies controlling vital commercial infrastructure? And isn't selling this protective role out to provide funding for the day-to-day social infrastructure responsibilities like schools and public health a false choice Nationalists simply hoping will pass the electorate by?
Well, the money's got to come from somewhere. Why not from taxpayers who willingly invest in something rather than forcibly investing in it through taxation?
Things we already own, yes.
I think money's got to come from somewhere, but we need to see more of the numbers. I mean, basically at this stage we do need to see the numbers. And I think that what's going on is sort of politicking. I do think that Goff has come out maybe stronger than he will, particularly on the taxation working group. Like, I can see maybe perhaps a raise in tax for the highest income group. I can't really see him perhaps enforcing it as much.
There's not enough of them though. Bomber's used the number there, what is it, 700 millionaires. So if you can raise it to 50% on them, there's not enough. Those guys can afford good accountants.
No. Okay, clearly that's only going to be part of the deal.
There's simply not enough. The wedge is so skinny at the top.
Loopholes into all of those property speculators, that will raise
But
money.
that's been done already.
We have wealth very much concentrated in a few hands in New Zealand. Like, if you actually do the numbers...
But there's wealth and income are two different things, and that's where Phil Goff's failing to grasp the concept. Wealth and income are two different things.
No, I understand that there are two different things.
But no one's prepared to do a capital gains tax, are they?
Well, let's wait and see. Phoebe, who wins and who loses from Goff's speech and Key's speech?
Oh, I think they were both pretty tough. I think, you know, the debate really circulated around the economy, which is interesting because for the last year we've heard that the economy is picking up and we don't need to worry. All of a sudden, we are hearing that we are in serious trouble.
Yep.
I think that National are putting quite a lot of the blame for a global recession on Labor, and I think some of that is quite unfair. I think that Gough might have mobilised Labor, potential Labor voters a little bit more than before.
Right.
I think the speech really had teeth, you know, in terms of anything that's come out of him recently, this is the strongest.
Yeah.
And I think don't underestimate that.
Who wins, who loses from Gough's speech and key speech?
Phil Gough loses because he stood there and made a speech with a nice dye job in front of a huge picture of himself with grey hair. And so that's the story. You might say that, but
yeah,
that's the story, and his $5,000 tax-free. People are getting that anyway with working for families. So it's just yawn-inducing bubblegum, and Labor should have stuck to a simple message, and again they've gone complicated, and again people aren't listening.
Thank you, panel. Issue 2. Rodney Hyde threatened to walk out of the government if Māori were given elected positions within the super city structure. Yet Rodney then signed off allowing 38 non-elected Māori to be appointed with voting rights onto 19 Auckland Council committees, giving them the balance of power. Is this Rodney at his most politically schizophrenic? Phoebe, I want Māori representation. I think it was appalling that Rodney threatened to resign from the government over it. But surely that representation must be earned within Māoridom by them voting and electing who they want to be represented by. Under this fiasco, these positions are appointed with no democratic mandate whatsoever. How tenable is this?
Oh, I think they're slightly stuck because it was drafted by National and Act under the Council Amendment Act. Okay, that they've drafted it so loosely that this is the situation as it is. I think it's potentially a good thing for Māori. I can see...
If they don't go troughing and spending up large and being complete asses.
Well, let's see.
Exactly. I think
that
as per their press release,
Māori about the notion whether it was democratically elected or not. I mean, you had Peter Sharples come out and say that they were really disappointed with the process, but that they have hope that there might be more representation on the council. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
These are people who are appointed.
I guess it comes down to whether they pass another amendment act or so on, because it's in law. That's the problem.
Cam, this isn't a right-wing or left-wing thing. It's just basic democratic convention. Should Māori representation be appointed with no democratic mandate?
Philosophically, no.
Yeah.
Right? I believe in direct election. I don't believe in special seats based on race or anything like that.
Okay.
We've actually got pretty good Maori representation in council, although that's probably about to change tonight with the botany selection with Jamie Lee Ross. Probably.
Is that your call for that?
That's my call for that. Okay. In one ballot too. Right. But that's by the by. If we actually look at this, and I'm prepared to suck it and see how we go with these appointed things. They've put out a press release saying that they're going to use their responsibilities sensibly and well. But the Machiavellian in me thinks that maybe Rodney Hyde did this as a setup because... I
don't think he's got that much imagination.
I think you might be right, but hang on, look at it. It's in there, it appears to look like a mistake. It looks like Maori have driven a truck through the legislation. They've now grabbed 38 representative positions.
Where they change the balance of power.
Where they change the balance of power, and there's no knowing whether that's going to change it right or left. If you've got a committee, say, with a 5-4 left-right split, then those two coming in could actually flip it to the right.
That's right.
Who knows? I'm prepared to suck it and see how they go. That's what I think maybe is a trap that unintentionally, and perhaps is now there, that if Maori don't use that responsibly and don't do sensible things with that representation, then when Len comes to have a referendum on Maori seats in the Auckland region, people are going to point to this and say, see, that we can't trust them.
Okay, question to both of you. Seeing the stink he kicked up about electorally represented Māori positions within the super city structure, did Rodney understand what he signed off on by allowing 38 Māori appointments to the 19 Auckland Council committees?
I don't think he did, and I think we have to, in terms of this issue, put the blame fairly, squarely on Act and National, because this is really in response to the amount of legislation that they're pushing through far too quickly at the moment under urgency.
Did he know?
If you look at the wording of those clauses, the representation, Maori representation, is on things to do with foreshore and seabed and natural resources. what no one has seen, Rodney included, and Labour as well, and Phil Twyford didn't kick up a stink about this before it happened, is what nobody saw is that Maori would apply those two very small descriptions unilaterally across every committee to say, well,
the super city was ran through.
But they had they had a commission's recommendations, Royal Commission's recommendations for 2 seats, and they
two race-based seats,
and then an extra amount of
quick question to you both. ACT's strategy for Epsom is to tell voters that if they don't vote for Rodney, then Hone will hold the balance of power within the Māori Party. Their belief being that Epsom voters dislike Māori more than they dislike sexist, hypocritical bullies. If Epsom voters are that narrow-minded, how will they view Rodney handing over such massive undemocratic power to an unelected appointed group of Māori?
Well, it's a fuss right now. Will it be a fuss in 6 months' time or 8 months' time when we're heading into an election?
Full ramifications of it. Yo, I think we will.
Well, I think you're wetting your pants in anticipation that it's going to be a nightmare. I don't know. I'm prepared to see it work.
Oh, how magnanimous of you, Phoebe.
Oh, it's a tough one. I think there's some people paying attention, but a lot of people aren't. I mean, if you look at Phil Goff's State of the Nation speech, most of the press was about his hair dye. So
unbelievable. Unbelievable he did that on that day.
Came in there that potentially in 6 months' time, you know, there will still be a fuss, but I think a lot of New Zealand doesn't actually focus on the politics that are going.
Cam, who wins, who loses by allowing unelected Māori such power?
Well, I think democracy loses. Again, maybe Maori win for now because they've got the increased representation, but I think it may be a trap that they'll fall into.
Who wins, who loses by allowing unelected Māori such power?
I think increased Māori representation. I think Māori win on that, and remembering too that, you know, kind of the traditional Māori system isn't necessarily democratic. These are iwi appointed people.
They've never been democratic.
No. Well, you know, in terms of modern times, but these are iwi appointed people, so there have been discussions over who should represent. I think, you know, democracy probably as a philosophy loses, and also Rodney Hyde.
Boy, doesn't he just...
So I don't know why you guys are upset. You should be gleeful.
Like I said, I want Māori representation, but it's got to be democratic. You just can't hand that kind of power over to a bunch of people who no one's even voted for. That's ridiculous. Thank you, panel. Coming up, Len wants Auckland to be a green city with targets to reduce CO2 emissions by 40%. Great idea or wanky nonsense? Citizen A is back after the break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Citizen A. We're reviewing the week with bloggers Cameron Slater and Phoebe Fletcher. Issue 3 this week. Len wants Auckland to be a green city with a target to reduce CO2 emissions by 40%. Great idea or wanky nonsense? Phoebe, a new study in the journal Nature Geoscience shows that the melting Arctic has a much larger than estimated impact on climate change. While the right-wing climate denial nutters have their heads stuck in the sand, the reality is that we have to cut back 40% emissions, don't we? And that Len shouldn't be aspirational, he should be forcing this through, shouldn't he?
I think there's a couple of things here. I mean, the first thing that I should declare is that I have done work on climate change projects in the Pacific, and so for me personally, with the climate change deniers, I think, you know, regardless of what you believe about climate change, there is no debate about the effects. You know, we have islands like Tokelau that are sinking. If you go and talk to, say, people in Vanuatu or in the Cook Islands that lost 80% of their crops, you know, during El Niños in the past, if you go and look at Papua New Guinea that got declared a state of emergency under El Niño, I think that there are kind of solid arguments as to why we should be looking at climate. My second point would be, I mean, I really do think, regardless of whether you disagree with the science, these changes are occurring. So whether you argue that they're kind of natural or not, I mean, to me it seems like the argument of smoking. It's like you're pumping smoke into your lungs to argue that that's not doing bad for you. It seems kind of crazy, like to argue that we can pollute non-stop. I mean, we don't have a great model for kind of consumption. If you look at the rate that America's going, if they continued producing at the same rate, they would need 5 planets to sustain themselves. So what I think you're seeing in kind of major cities at the moment is a movement towards, you know, what's going to happen when Auckland has many more people. It might not, in terms of climate change, impact on us directly as much, okay? It tends to kind of hit You know, the Pacific really is the worst off. But you've got places like Germany that do use things like solar panels and so on. It's a good kind of branding for the city. Let's face it, Auckland doesn't really have too much to sell itself on. Okay, we're a city of sales, but in terms of our long-term development, I think taking a kind of ecological approach is not necessarily a bad thing. It could be good for the economy.
Cam, you are a dirty, filthy climate denier who has done all he can on his blog to muddy the climate change debate in the same way the tobacco industry try and twist the claim smoking has no connection to cancer. Your blog has repeatedly claimed that no warming has occurred since 2005 and that this proves the science is not settled. Yet last week, the evidence was shown that 2010 was as hot as 2005, destroying one of the vital climate denial arguments. Len Brown is pushing ahead with an idea whose time has come, isn't it?
It's wanky nonsense, which is what you used in the header at the start of this. You know, aspirational goals, 40% reduction. Yeah. It's this list. It's at number 54 on his list of tosspot things. 55. You know, people think that I want people to pump pollutants into the atmosphere. Look, I love the bush, I love the rivers, I go hunting, I do all those things. The last thing I want is polluted countryside. And so if the argument is do we want pollutants in the air, well, the answer very clearly is no, we don't. And there's no issue over that at all. If the question is we put all of these things into the air and therefore it's causing El Nino, that is bollocks, and anyone who puts that out is just lying to people. It's been happening for thousands and thousands of years. And man hasn't caused that.
In terms of global warming, you're confusing the argument because actually what it leads to is variations.
Several times in your speech.
No,
you did.
But okay, there's a longer argument behind this. But you know that, for example, global warming actually causes variations in weather patterns.
Exactly.
Only localised.
Exactly. No,
you know
doesn't.
that the major scientific communities at the moment are talking about the continuation of resources. You know that the Australian Defence...
In the 1970s we talked about the world's doomsday scenario of global cooling, and now we're talking about global... what is it?
No,
that is twisting it. Global warming is
that is
CO2.
That is twisting it. That is twisting it. That is twisting it. And you know it. Phoebe, Len Brown's plan would see environmental concerns factored into urban and rural planning throughout the region. As soon as you start using the environment to stop development, right-wing environmental destroyers like Cam over here start screaming about Luddites and tree huggers wanting to hold up progress to save native snails. How does this work in reality?
How does this work in reality? Well, I think, you know, it's a unique kind of selling point for tourism. If you look at tourism as a kind of emerging thing in nations' economies, it's been over like the last decade, 85% of nations now have tourism in their sort of top 5 focus. Right. So I think, you know, in terms of you know, creating a sustainable city that's easier to live in when we get more and more people here, which we will, okay, and we need to sort of think, frankly, not short term, but long term. Okay, yeah.
Good point.
But, you know, we need to think about, like, the next 50, 100 years, and I think Len is showing that kind of vision. Yeah.
Cam, yesterday the final review of the so-called ClimateGate scandal rejected any claim that there was any data manipulation in climate warming evidence. This is the fourth review that has found that scientists did not lie, as was claimed by right-wing climate deniers. I put to you that Len Brown's 40% CO2 emissions cutback is visionary, necessary and right, isn't it?
It's not visionary. I don't have a problem with introducing, for instance, all new houses that are built have solar power built into it and then feed that into the grid. I think that's a brilliant idea. Personally, I'd like to build a house that's off-grid. But for purely selfish reasons, I don't want to pay any money for power. But you pay either way. I don't have any issues with cleaning up our waterways or anything like that. I think that's important. But wanky things like cutting back CO2 emissions, the simple answer is, how are you going to do that, Len? Well, you're going to take all the buses off the road? How's that going to help your public transport policy?
Well, let's do that. Let's ask that. Does aspirational mean wanky, flaky bullshit? Helen Clark was aspirational about CO2 cutbacks, yet emissions rose more in her decade than any other time in New Zealand's history.
Mainly because she spoke hot air most of the time.
Nah. Yep.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, in some sense, all politics is aspirational. I mean, isn't that John Key's key phrase? That he was going to bring in a new sense of aspirational politics so that, you know, people who are at the bottom would feel like they would be able to work their way up. I think that there is, you know, cold hard cash here in terms of tourism, and that we do need people that are thinking about kind of our branding in the long term.
Cam, who wins, who loses by making Auckland a green city?
Well, I mean, I want Len to try and push that forward. I really do, because he won't achieve it. It'll be like every other thing that he's set out to do. They're 40, 50-year goals, and he'll be long in the grave before anything's realised, and he won't get any benefit from pushing these stupid things.
How mean of you. Phoebe, who wins, who loses by making Auckland a green city?
I think all of us Aucklanders win.
Yep.
I personally would like to live in a much more green and sustainable city.
Let's wrap the show with last word. Phoebe, your final word this week is?
Oh, I would like to kind of turn our lens to Australia a little bit, who had their Australia Day 2 days ago, and just really draw attention to what's still going on in the Northern Territory, where you had the military sent in 2007 to clean up Aboriginal communities. They did this by abolishing the Racial Discrimination Act, and they banned all alcohol and pornography. And really what we've seen is not one sexual assault trial. We have seen not one. Okay, we have seen people have their benefits exchanged for food stamps, which means that they need to travel up to 60 miles to the next dairy. And we have Aborigines approaching the UN last year to ask to be considered refugees in their own country. This is a crisis, you know, that has been going on for the last 3 years, that has not had enough attention in the New Zealand media. I really think New Zealanders need to speak up, you know, and tell Australians, we love them across the ditch, you know, that this is really not acceptable and they need to change their policy in this regard.
Cam, your final word?
Well, clearly Phoebe's never been to the Northern Territory in any great amount of time.
I have a lot of Aboriginal friends.
Whatever, I've been there, and had a look, and I know
exactly what it's. Is this your final word?
No, my final word is for the Labour Party.
Yes.
They need to keep their message simple. It isn't about Phil's haircut. It isn't about any of that. They need to keep asking the population of New Zealand, are things any better off after 3 years of national? And the answer is binary. It's either yes or it's no. And the more that they get no's, the more that they know they're on the right track. Having complicated, silly explanations about what they're going to cut off this and fruit and veg this and first 5,000 whatever's of this, it all is just a distraction. They need a very simple message. They actually probably don't even need policy. Are you any better off after 3 years of national? Yeah, if the answer is yes, well, there's nothing we can do for you. If the answer is no, vote Labour.
The Reagan policy.
I think
the Reagan policy.
You know, in terms of the people, that he, you know, was targeting, he's got youth on there. If you look at the rates of youth unemployment in the UK, the US and New Zealand, one of the effects of the economic recession has been that those people can't get jobs.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, Cam. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. The attention on Phil Goff's hair colour by the mainstream media purposely shifted the focus away from his announcement of the first $5,000 tax-free policy, yet the media can't be uncritical enough of John Key's plan to flog off our state assets. Key could eat a kitten live on close-up and the New Zealand Herald would still blame the kitten for being delicious. My grandfather, my grandmother, my father, my mother and I have paid for those assets that John Key wants to flog off. Why should mum and dad investors buy shares in something they already bloody well own? We are talking assets with a combined value of $11.75 billion and earn New Zealanders $700 million a year. Debt servicing costs 1.22% of GDP in 2010. We don't have a debt servicing problem, and in the worst recession since 1929, New Zealanders are looking to the state for the type of protection and state intervention that the banks who were part of the problem scrambled to for protection. Why is it that the powerful, who were partly responsible for the crash, can be bailed out and protected, while the most vulnerable, who had no hand in its creation, have to do with less minus any protection? Austerity measures don't work, and the UN only last week pointed out that austerity measures could drag the global economy into a double-dip recession. And of the $300 million per week we're borrowing, $120 million of that is for the tax cuts that benefit the very same wealth class Key now wants to sell our public assets off to. It's not the hair colour that's died, it's the quality of the journalism. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Citizen Bomber Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content. so you can see more of New Zealand on air.